Begin the current Daf Mesechta Yevamos Daf Peites begins 7 lines down at the top of the Yamin. We continue to explain the halacha of our Mishnah regarding the penalties of a woman who thought her husband was dead based on the testimony of one aide, and she gets remarried. It turns out her husband's still alive. So we talk about the halachas of what the penalties are, and I'm going to continue explaining some of the specifics of that halacha. Some of those discussed in today's daf are, like we said, the knas is imposed on Nisas Be'erech if she gets remarried based on the testimony of one witness. The halacha of tebel comes into discussion regarding untyped produce, what's considered being masakin at tebel, what's not. Regarding a pot that has a hole, so that biblically is obligated in the Trumas and Maisus because it's nourishing from the ground. If it's not nakav, it doesn't have a hole, so it's not biblically obligated because it's not really growing from the ground, it's growing from the pot. So we said in the Mishnah that if a woman gets married based on the testimony of one aide, then her husband comes. So since she wasn't daika mitzvah, she really didn't check it that well, obviously. She's subject to a knas, which we said in the Mishnah. She's sleeping both, she doesn't get a ksuba, no pears, no mezainis, no blois, not on either one of them. So our Gemara continues to explain the rationale for this halacha. As the Gemara explains, the Mishnah said, "Ein law ksuba," she does not get a ksuba. So the Gemara explains why. Why did the Rabban institute a ksuba? Which Taisa has a whole discussion. What do you mean? I thought ksuba is deraisa. What do you mean Rabban being masakin? So Taisa says no, meaning even by the cases of, let's say, when it's not deraisa by rabbinic, then therefore they're allowed to even uproot it when it's deraisa. But why were the Rabban so careful, so into ksuba that the woman should get a dowry when she gets removed from the marriage? Said it won't be easy in the eyes of the husband to just remove it because, like, oh, this is a financial obligation over here. So that's in general. But this woman that she's not getting a ksuba, let it be light in his eyes to get rid of her because we want her to divorce her because she is actually forbidden to her husband. So therefore, neither one of the husbands are giving her a ksuba because she's actually us to the baal and to the baal. That's why she doesn't get a ksuba, because the whole point is that it should not be easy. But here, to the contrary, we want it to be easy because actually she's forbidden to the men. Similarly, we said in the Mishnah, in lo peres, she doesn't get her produce back. For the mezainis, she doesn't get sustenance. For the beloy, she doesn't take her worn out clothing back. Why not? So they more explain. Because Tanai Kesuba, the stipulations of the Ksuba are Ksuba Dami. In the Ksuba is written, Mizoinaichi, Viksusaichi. It talks about these obligations that he has. Those are all stipulations of the Ksuba. And we said she's not getting a Ksuba. Now, also the payers that the husband ate, he doesn't have to pay her back, even though she doesn't get her ksuba, because the Rabbanan penalized her, meaning since we find Ba'aman Lakan Gadol that she gets the payers that he ate, so that's what we have to say over here, that no, here, even though she's not getting ksuba, he doesn't have to give her back the payers. Usually it's countered by something else, but here where she's not getting anything from him, so maybe what he eats from a payer, so we have to give her back, saying no, doesn't have to give her any of these things back. They're all considered the penalty of her losing out her ksuba and the stipulations of the ksuba. Additionally, the Mishnah said, not lo she took from either one of these husbands her ksuba or mezainis, whatever it is. So the Mishnah said she actually has to give it back. This must have pshita, obviously. If she has no rights, obviously she would have to give it back. Says the Gemara, no, what would you say, as we do say many times in halacha, keeping the tafsalim of kinam. Once she grabbed, we don't take it away from her because now the status quo is okay. We don't really know, so you're not allowed to take. But once you do, we're not going to take it away from you. That's what we're telling you, that no, even if she takes, says the Mishnah, she would have to give it back. Then we said in the Mishnah, havlad mamzer, the children from either one of these husbands is going to be a mamzer. So the Gemara is going to introduce a halacha that's going to come back to reference our halacha from our Mishnah. Not hasam, starting a new idea. Learn the Mishnah Mesechta Trumas. Ein tarmin min hatame al hatar. You're not allowed to, if let's say you need to give truma to the kohen, let's say 1/50th of your produce. You're not allowed to take tame produce and give that to the kohen for the truma on your tahor produce because of a loss to the kohen. Obviously, tame truma the kohen can't eat. He'll be able to use it as fuel, but he won't be able to eat it, so it's a loss. So you can't separate truma that's tame on your tahor produce. Now, vim tarm, let's say someone did do it, so it depends. If he did it b'shagig by mistake, he didn't realize what he's doing, truma said truma. It's going to be an effect of truma, as the Gemara is going to bring on Amud Beit from Rabbi Lai. Amazing, if he did it deliberately, he hasn't done anything. Now those words are very important. Says the Gemara, "My loy asav loy klum." What does it mean that he hasn't done anything? So it's actually machlekes. Amar Rav Chizda, he says that loy asav loy klum means kolikar. When this guy separated b'memeza deliberately this produce that's tamei for truma for his Torah produce, he hasn't done anything. That filahi griva, even that little bit of truma, is hadalatively goes back to be considered untight. You haven't done anything. So literally means say you haven't done anything. But Reb Nassim Bar Oisha he says no. When you say that you haven't done anything, means to say for the ultimate objective of l'saken es hashirayim, to rectify the remnants, the Torah produce, that this would have made them the shiraim that would have permitted them to be eaten and they're not tabel anymore. No, it remains tabel. You haven't fixed the leftovers. Ava truma hava. But what you did separate was truma and was sanctified, and therefore you have to go back and take truma from the tar. But what you did separate is going to be truma. That's machlekes Rav Chizda and Rav Nassim Bar Oisha. How do we qualify this loy asav loy klum? Does it mean nothing or nothing for your ultimate objective of being masakin your tabel? But that what you did separate is going to be true. So the Gemara explains that Rav Chizda l'hamak Rav Nassim Bar Oisha, he didn't say Rav Nassim that says that it is something, it's just not enough to be masakin the shirayim. He says, how could you say that? The Yamid have a truma. If you say that it was truma, like you're saying it was truma, you just make him do it again. But what he gave from the tamei produce is going to be truma. But then zin in the pasha, at times the person is going to be negligent. But loyin, he's not going to subsequently be mafresh from tahar because of shengetin. I already did it already. Now later on the Gemara is going to ask, what type of question, what type of point is Rav Chizda saying? If you tell me biblically it's truma, from the fact that the Mishnah even said b'shoigig truma se truma, so how are you going to remove it from the sanctity of Rav Chizda because of Dilma Pasha? So you're going to tell me it's not even considered truma? Forget about to be masakin Yisrael. It's not even considered truma at all. How can you say that? If biblically it's truma because of Gzeira de Rabbanon of Dilma Pasha, you're going to tell me it's not considered as truma? But Al-Kabbalah, this is what Rav Chizda is saying. Rav Chizda is saying, no, I can't say like you, Rav Nassim Bar Yeshua. Because if you tell me that it was truma, you're just going to make it do it again. They're going to say, I already did it once. Do me a favor. I'm not doing it again. So therefore, you have to say, Sir Rav Chizda, that la'asav kol ikar means even that griva is relatively nothing was done at all. And therefore, the guy will understand that he has to be true. However, the Gemara asks on Rav Chizda from Maishna Mahaditan. Why is it different from a different Mishnah Masechtas Trumas that says as follows? Hatoidim kishus. If someone separated cucumbers, v'nimtzis mara, and turns out that it was bitter. Now, it's like Rashi explains, it was a mistake. And the fact that the words are nimtzis, it turns out that it was bitter. Obviously, he didn't know this originally. Well, let's avatiach. It's a watermelon, or however you translate that. V'nimtzis saruach, and it turns out it was sour. So truma, it's going to be truma. These two cases, but v'yachz v'yitra. You have to go and take truma again. Wait a second. Doesn't that sound like Reb Nassim Bar Yeshua? Doesn't that sound like the way he said that when you gave something that was not appropriate, it is truma, you just got to do it again? Not like Rav Chizda says, no, the Mishnah is saying that it is truma, you just got to do it again. So that seems to be not like Rav Chizda. Says the Gemara, what? Shoigig amazes koramis? You're asking from a case of shoigig, which we're saying it is truma, on the case of Chizda, this tomorrow when you did it deliberately? What type of question is that? Shoigig, the case of the cucumbers and the watermelon, it was a mistake. I didn't realize it was sour. You didn't do anything prohibited, you didn't do anything wrong. But mezid, the case of when you're separating truma that's tamei on the tar produce, you're doing it deliberately, kavadi surah. So then you did something wrong. So what? So Taisa explains. So therefore the Rabbanan considered as if you did not take of truma at all. And that's why that guriva, that little bit that you separate from truma, is going to go back to being tabel. Why? Because if you're going to say it's truma, like Rav Chizda said, you're going to come to be negligent. Because you obviously are making yourself as a rasha from the first time for the fact that you deliberately went and gave something inappropriate. But if you did it by mistake, you didn't do anything deliberately forbidden. So therefore we don't suspect you that you're going to be maybe pasha. And therefore, yitrum b'yachs, give truma and then give it again. So therefore, it's not difficult in Rav Chizda. Okay, fine, it's not difficult from that Mishnah. It says the Gemara, But I could ask a contradiction from a case of shaygig and the case of shaygig. Why? Because hachal be here by the case of Toma, Kartani, what did we learn in the Mishnah? We said if you did it b'shaygig, you didn't realize that what you're doing wrong of giving the truma tmei on the tahar produce. We said truma say truma, that is going to be val truma. Problem is hasam over there regarding the bitter cucumber. Kartani we learned truma has to be yitrum. That is truma, and you have to do truma again. So wait a second, you have to take truma again, or you have to take truma again? Didn't you tell me that? In other words, okay, I'm done. I'm not asking Rav Chizr right now, because you're right. You can't ask from shaygig on Mason. But I have a different question, says the Gemara. Once we're asking questions, how do you resolve the shaygig? You told me by the case of the cucumbers that okay, it's truma, but you got to do it again. But by Tuma, you told me if you did b'shaygig, no, you just take it's good truma. So how to resolve that contradiction? Says the Gemara, no, hasam over there by the cucumbers, shaygig karv l'meizid. You're right, it's a shaygig, so it will be truma, but it's very close to being b'meizid, to having done it deliberately. Why? Because the boile lemitame, you should have tasted it. As Taisa explains, what do you mean tasted it? It's tevel, which I have tasted. Taisa explains, what you should have done, you should have separated a little bit, and then mineu bay, that meaning you slice off a little piece, and then take a piece of that and separate truma from that on that. Now that's mutter. Then taste that, and if you see that it's bitter, then don't do the rest like that. So if you're making a recipe, don't do 10 times the recipe before you maybe do a little sample first, before you take every ingredient you have in the whole house, and then you're out of stock of everything. So that's the saying, meaning you should have tasted it first. When you didn't taste it, you give it to the kohen. That's negligence, close to negligence. Therefore, we penalize you, and therefore it's yachs b'yitrim. But you're right. But in the case of tam elatah, which there's no tasting over there for Tumma. You didn't know it was a mistake. So therefore that's what we say it's going to be Truma and it's not, you don't have to be Yachzav Yitrim. Okay. So first we asked Shoygig on Mezid, we said you can't ask Shoygig on Mezid. Then we asked Shoygig on Shoygig, we just answered the question. Now, but on Mezid on Mezid. Says okay, but I have a contradiction regarding B'mezid on B'mezid. Why? Because Hachad G'tani here by the halacha of Tumma we learned that if you did B'mezid, lost a klum. Which again the contrary of Chizda is you literally have not done anything. It's even that truma that you separate is not going to be considered truma. Hasim Tanan, but over there, Mishnah Masechtas Demai, we learned a different halacha. So again, we're going to a different Mishnah because we want to ask, what's the halachic status when you do something deliberately wrong of the truma? What's the halacha going to be? Here by Tum we say you haven't done anything, but the Mishnah Demai says as follows: Hatayrim, if someone separates truma, b'mezid, deliberately, regarding Misha'ein Nakav, if you take it from something that doesn't have a hole, which if it doesn't have a hole, the pot, it's not biblically obligated because it's not really nourishing from the ground. So if you take a truma from that which has no hole, al nakav on the pot that did have a hole, which means that what you're trying to be mesakein is biblically obligated. But what you're giving to the kohen, that produce is not biblically obligated. So says the Mishnah, truma v'yachzav yitrum. Okay, what you gave him is truma. But you have to go ahead and take truma again. So wait a second. This is a case of deliberately giving something inappropriate to the kohen, and you're telling me that it is going to be truma. You got to give it again because it was wrong. But wait a second. Didn't you tell me about the case of tama that when you do it inappropriately, you didn't do anything? It's not even truma in the first place. So that seems to contradict Rav Chizda because he said nothing was done, and here we see when you do deliberately something wrong. It was truma, you just got to do it again. Says the Gemara, I'll explain to you the difference. But today money, since it's two different pots, when you tell him to go ahead and take truma from the other one, Sayas, he's going to listen to you, and therefore there's no concern to decree that maybe he's going to be negligent. But from the case of when you separate from Tameh and Tar, where both of them are B'chad Mana, they both grew in the same pot, in a pot that has a hole, when you're going to tell him, give him this that you separated, and give him again, let's say he's not going to listen to you. And he's just going to give the Tameh more to the kohen. So that's where Rav Chizda held, better give him back, tell him no, that truma was not a valid truma, it's old tevel, so that he should give the tar to the kohen, because if you give him, if he's going to give him the first time, the tameya, he's like a string thing. Goes, what do I already did it already? What do you want from me? Because it's both from the same pot, just one became tameh. But if from two different pots, one was nakum, I can't verstehen, I can't lie. He says, okay, it's truma. Chtaf gave nachama because this is from one, this is from a different one. So therefore, that's why it's different. Even though they're both talking case of the mazer when you did an appropriate truma, there's a chiluk regarding one that it would truma b'yachzor. Truma, another one, no. We have to say loss of kulum because since they're from the same pot, you're going to think you already did your needs, and therefore we want it to be like you didn't do anything. Now the Gemara, this is all in Rav Chizda. Says the Gemara, that he says loss of kulum. What does that mean? It means l'sakin shirayim. So we will explain the Abatana on Rav Chizda's opinion. Now loss of kulum means you didn't do anything. But according to Rav Nassim Oishia, what does it mean you haven't done anything? It just means the second means just saying that you just haven't fixed the tavel of what you tried to fix. Ava truma hava. But what you did separate is truma, and the kohen could immediately take that tamei truma that you gave him and use it as fuel to cook his pot to make his cheesecake that he's making for Shavuos. He could right away use it as fuel. Problem is, we're getting some days. A different question now, based on the principle of Nassim Ba'ishya. Why is it different than what we learned about in the Mishnah Masechet Demai? That says, if let's say it's the other way around, not from she'ein nakav on nakav, but let's say min hanakav. You separated from the pot that has a hole, which is biblically obligated because it's growing from the ground, al she'ein nakav, on produce which hydroponics, some type of thing that not growing from the ground, has no hole, the pot, which is only rabbinically obligated. So say, truma, say truma. The truma that you separated from the deraisa produce is truma. But v'lo teichel, the kohen can't eat it until you're going to take out on it, meaning that you're going to give for that saw truma ma'aser b'makam acher, truma ma'aser from another place. Why? Because we consider that what you're giving to the kohen as bona fide tavel, because it's only truma when you separate on some tavel that you're fixing. Here, what you gave him was not truma on some other tavel, because biblically that's not obligated in trumas at all to be considered tavel that you're being masakim with that truma. Now, if that's the case, ask the Gemara. Here also is the same thing, that you should not have given it to the kohen, the truma that was tamei, because like we said, that was not a real appropriate truma, because he might burn the tevel that's tamei, because we're going to consider as tevel, because it wasn't an appropriate truma. So if it's not an appropriate truma, so then it's really tevel. And you're not allowed to light even tevel that's tamei, as the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbos of Chavav Meral. So why is it any different from the halacha where we said that don't give it to the kohen to eat, even though it's truma? And we're saying it's a valid truma, but we're saying you can't give it to him because it's not an appropriate truma until you first separate trumas and ma'aser on that truma that you gave him. So why are you saying over here that yitrum meaning what you gave him is truma? You just have to go do it truma again according to Nassim Ba'ishya. Well, how could you say it's truma? How could you give it to him if it's really then technically still tevel, because it's not a valid truma? You're telling me, you're saying you're going to separate truma again on that tevel tahar, and you're going to make it truma. It's going to have all the halachas. Obviously, this is not truma. So until you separate truma a second time, how do you let the kohen have it? He even though it's truma tamei that he's going to burn, you're not allowed to burn tevel. It's really tevel. It's tamei. So the Gemara Noshani Hacha. Here it's different by the case of tamei and tar, because it's not true, like we were assuming in our question, that it's not valid. It's like the case of min hanakav she'ein hanakav, that it's really not even truma yet. It's still tevel because you weren't. Truma only becomes truma when you're fixing something else. Since by nakav on ein nakav not only fixing something else, it's really still tevel. Here's not the case. When you separate tamei on tar, although in our questioning we were explaining it because if it's not valid at all, it's not true. Because midiraisa biblically truma mal yasi. Biblically, when you separate from produce that's tamei as truma for that which is tar, it actually biblically is considered valid truma. But in contrast, when you separate from nakav on ein nakav, that's what's called menachiv ala pater. And since you're separating on something that's pater biblically, so then it cannot have the title of truma, and therefore it's tevel. And therefore, yes, that's what we said from the Mishnah and the Demai, the top line of the Gemara, that it's going to be forbidden even to the kohen. But Rabbanan Geyser, even though it's not really truma, to give it to the kohen, because lamaisa you called it truma, and this is so who gave it has to still separate on that truma other trumas lamaisa, because really it's not even truma, it's really tevel. And however, Rashi points out, you would not have to go back and separate from the Eina Nakov, because its truma is only rabbinic, and you already separated for it, even though biblically that's not really a good separation, but at least regarding the rabbinic law, that what you separated from the Nakov on that Eina Nakov would be good enough for the Eina Nakov. And if you would not have to separate Trumas Ma'aseh again on the Eina Nakov, but you would have to separate for the Truma that you gave, because that Truma really is Tal. Now, regarding the case of that we previously quoted, where you separate from the Eina Nakov on the Nakov, which you might previously said that it is Truma and it's permitted to the Kayan, yeah, because that's Minat Patra Lachiv, because really Eina Nakov is not biblically obligated. So therefore, even though this that you separate on it will not exempt it from Truma, and it's not even going to take effect the title of Truma, even so, we don't say Loi Teichel, because we don't really care if the Kohen eats it in Tevel or not, because it doesn't really have halach of Tevel and Truma midayraisa. So since you ultimately did something, even though it's not even biblically valid, well, that's okay, we're not concerned about that. But Al Kapanim, coming back to our case of Tumatara, yeah, the reason why we're not concerned that we don't say, "Ooh, don't give it to the Kohen yet until we first separate someone else." No, because biblically, actually separating Tameh on Tar is actually biblically valid. Where do we know this? Oh, this is Rabbi Shloimy. This is Rabbi Shloimy's halacha. That Rabbi Shloimy says, "Menaim leterminat aliyaf." From where do you know if you separate from bad stuff on the good stuff? Shechumas truma, which that's what we consider really truma. That Tameh is considered bad stuff because it is truma. It's very inferior because you can't eat it. It loses its value. Incredibly, that you just got to use it as fuel. But how do you know that if you do minara yafa that truma is going to be valid truma? The chsiv, it's a pasuk in Mamidra. It says v'leisisu love chet, and don't carry on them a sin ba'adim chameschel b'menu when you separate the choicest part from it. It sounds like that if you don't separate from the choicest, then you can be carrying a sin that you're giving the kohen not from the choicest. Now, if it ain't kaddish, if it's not going to be considered sanctified, the truma that you're giving that's raw on the yafa. So Nasiyas Chet Lama, what's this sin that you get? Obviously, we can't. You see, the term of the Rali Yafa, if you separate from the bad under the good, so Truma is Truma, the Truma is going to be Truma, and therefore that's the same thing from a Tameh Latar, that biblically it is valid. Now, obviously, rabbinically, we're penalizing you, and we're saying that no, you got to separate Truma again. But the reason why we're not concerned to give it right away according to B'nasim V'Oishia, which, wait a second, Mission Mai says, it's Truma, but don't let him eat it until you first separate Truma Mai from Makamacha. Yeah, that's because over there, biblically, it's still considered as Tevel. Because the Nakov is not fixing any on the Eina Nakov, and therefore it's not, you can't call it Truma. Truma is only when it's this elevated part of something else. Here's not elevating something else. So therefore you gotta be careful. But here we don't have to be careful. Let the Kohen use it right away as fuel. You have to do Truma again? Yeah, that's a rabbinic penalty. But biblically this is considered as Truma because it's Minara Ala Yafa. Now based on this, Amalei Rabbi of Chizdi says, Lididach, according to you, this is again to Rav Chizda. This is the machlokes Rav Chizda and Rav Nosson Oishir. According to you, David, that you say lo asab la klub kol ikr, that when the Mishnah was saying that if the guy did it deliberately, that he separated tamei produce for the truma, for the tahar produce, that it means that flahu griva, even that little bit that you gave to the kohen, no, that's not truma. It's going to go back to its untyped state. Not my time, but what's the reason? So you explain, and this is what he's going to ask on. That's the rabbinic decree, because if you let it be considered as truma, the guy's going to say, do me a favor, I already gave truma, I'm not giving again. So we want you to know, no, you never gave, even that truma is going back to the temple, so then you'll make sure to give the right thing, tahar produce and not tamei produce. Says the Rabbah, which starts a whole series of questions on Rav Chizda, Mika Midi, is there such a thing? So you tell me, wait a second, biblically it was really truma, as we see in the case of Shaygig. And but when he does deliberately, which you're going to make him separate again. So because maybe he's going to come to be negligent, Rabban taking this, what's really biblically truma, and making it back to chulin? You think the courts are going to uproot a biblical halacha? How could they do this? This is biblically truma. It's valid truma. Oh, you want to knas him? You want to say no? It's not really knas. We're really concerned that what happens is that you might not go and separate again. So the Rabban Iker, biblical law, because of their concern. Somebody said to him, "What va'atlei tizbera?" And this takes us into the next daf even, that you don't think so, that Rabban Iker dim in the Torah? But not in our Mishnah. Now you know why we brought in this whole discussion. Where does this come into our sugya, to our mesechta? Because it relates back to the halacha of our Mishnah. This is Rav Chiz's response to support himself. We said that this woman, who heard from one aide that her husband died, so with permission of the court, she got remarried. And voila, her husband comes back, noch shachris, 3 years later, and he's alive. So he said, Havlan mamzer mizeh mizeh. So he said the children from the first husband and the second husband are mamzer. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Says Rav Chizah as follows. I understand that the children from the second husband are mamzerim because she's a married woman. All those years she was living with the second husband was Eishes. Fine. Wait a second. Why are the children from the first husband mamzerim? Ishtahi, she's his wife. Yisrael Malihu, he's a bona fide Yisrael. Ooh, the Rabbanon, because they want to make a point, they say, no. We're going to consider you with your husband, Asa. And the children are going to be Mamzer. Now, for whatever the reason is that they're doing this, but they're being Oiked Davim and Hatayra. Because what's happening is, if you're telling me that the children from the first husband are Mamzer, which they're really not, a mamzer is permitted to get married to a mamzeres. A regular Yisrael is not. It's in the Torah. So you, Rabbanan, are being Oiker Davim in the Torah. So you see that from our Mishnah, this concept. Don't ask on me and say, how could you say this? That Hadal Tivle, because, Dilma Pasha, Rabbanan being Oiker, Truma Deraisa, because of their concern. Look at our Mishnah. Consider the child of mamzers. You're permitting him a mamzeres because you're being concerned. You're being Oiker Davim in the Torah. Adam Allah, he says Rav Chizda, no. Hacham Shmuel says, Asa b'mamzer. It's not true. When we say he's a mamzer, the child of the first husband, he's still forbidden the mamzeres. And Mechiki Asa Rav and Amar B'yechid, this is Asa b'mamzeres. This child is forbidden mamzeres. If I might call him mamzer, why call him a mamzer? That's lo Yisrael Yisrael. That's just a rabbinic penalty, just to say that he cannot marry a regular Jewish woman. To be stringent and make an offense for the Torah. But it's not uprooting biblical law. But to be mekel on divrei Torah, that would be considered akira, and that's the question that we have in Rav Chizda. Mechatesa. How could you say such a thing that by the truma that you tell me kol ikir that is not truma? What do you mean it is truma biblically? So what says this not truma? We see that from the case of Shaygili, we brought from Rabbi Loi that if you turn him into a minarali off, it is truma. So what are you telling me? You want to bring a rive in the Mishnah? You see that it's called a mamzer? Nah, that's only not to permit mamzeres. I'll be like the Matera, should be machmar. And tell me he can't marry Bas Yisrael. Now, however, Shalcher of Chizda Rabbah, of Chizda, who again is this disputant, he sent to Rabbah b'yad Ravacha bar Ravuna in the hand through an agency of Ravacha bar Ravuna. He asked him, "The ein bezdin mastin lakadav." Is that really so? Because again, he has to defend his opinion. Rav Chizda is trying to show how that you could be a kedem matera, and therefore, by the case of Mazid, he wants to be able to prove that yes, they're uprooting the biblical truma that there is over there. He says, you really think Bezdin cannot stipulate to uproot biblical law? But Vatanya says, I'll bring you a raya from a brisa. From when is it that a person inherits his wife that's a minor? Meaning if she dies, and we don't say, that maybe in the future she was going to do miyun, which if she did miyun, which was a type of refusal, turns out she was never really his wife, because we're talking about a yisayma. Her father didn't marry her off, it's only rabbinic. And her brothers or her mother married her off, and therefore she's able to refuse the marriage. So from what point on do we consider it like she's already his wife and that he'll inherit her? So it's a machlekes. Bishamim, they say mishatamid b'kamasa, when she stands in her height. Rashi translates that means to say that when she already reached her period, in her years, puberty, bringing the pubic hairs, that's what it's considered that the husband will inherit his wife. That was a minor. They say when she comes to chuppah, which is one of the stages of marriage. The Yazami says when they have bia. Then says the Mishnah, says the Brisa, he will inherit her, and if he's a kohen, give him tamata. V'chil is beginning to truma, and she could eat because of truma like a wife of a kohen. So the Gemara explains when it says when she stands at a full height. So says the Gemara, is that even if she didn't come to the chuppah, meaning as Tais explains, the assumption is that just like as we'll see that Beisil don't require a medis b'kemasa of Beishamai, so the assumption right now is also that Beishamai does not require she to come to the chuppah of Beisil. So it's even if she didn't come to chuppah. So what's the question? As Rashi explains, The Gemara previously in this Masechta of Chavtez and Beis said that even an adult wife who's engaged, no, there's no halacha of aninas. You cannot be mitamatar. If she does, it is not yarshin her. So how can you say a minor wife that once she's tamid b'kamasa, even if she didn't go to the chuppah, that all these halachas apply? Even an adult wife who didn't go to chuppah, these halachas don't apply. So the Gemara says, no, ema same she tamid b'kamasa biti comes to chuppah. No, we're saying that if you have both of them, if you have that she's standing at her full height and she went to chuppah, this is what Bisham is telling the Beisil. The Kamritu, Mishtakan's L'chuppah, Bisham is telling the Beisil, this you said that you also need to have coming to the chuppah. However, meaning you say coming to the chuppah, I'amda b'kamasa mahanya l'chuppah. No, it says Bisham, only if she was standing at full height, then the chuppah helps. But if not, the chuppah is not going to help. So Beisil holds chuppah is enough. Bisham is saying this, that you're saying chuppah is only if it's time to become masa. But if she's not become masa, then even chuppah itself is not going to help for the husband yet to inherit the minor wife. The third opinion, he says from when there's bia. So the Gemara asks, how can that be? But Amar Rabbi himself says in Perek B'Shamay later on Kuf Chesam and Aleph that ein ma'aseh ketana klum. What a minor does is not significant. So even if she had bia, how would that make it into the wife so that you could be able to inherit her? Amos says the Gemara, you're right. Mishad Tagdol b'tibal. He holds that she has to be an adult and do bia, and only then will he inherit her. Okay, that's the machlekes in that brisa. The main thing says the Gemara, especially for what we learned according to Beis Hillel, Ketani Mias. So says Rav Chizda, you see in this brisa that Yersha, we said the husband could inherit the wife. When, according to Beis Hillel, even though she's not a gedayla, as long as she was nichnas l'chuppah, even though she was not even b'kaimas. In this case, in the Raisa be Yarsla. Really, biblically, the father, obviously not the father because the father's dead because she was a Yisrael and they got married, but Rashi points out, meaning the relatives of the father, biblically are supposed to inherit this girl. Rabbinically, the husband's inheriting her because, as Rashi points out, the marriage of a minor is only rabbinic. Why? Because the Rabbanan wanted that if you have a single girl with no father running around the streets, people are going to treat her in a disrespectful way. As the Gemara says later enough, Kufit Beis and Beis. But biblically, there's no rights of the kedushin of this girl, not for her mother, not for her brother, to marry her off. So what do you see? Biblically, there's halacha of the Yerusha going to the relatives of the father. Rabbinically, they make this kedushin and they're uprooting the biblical Yerusha from the relatives of the father going to the husband. You see, says Rav Chizda, Besdin could be masna lakar dav minatara, they could uproot biblical law. Says Gemara, you talking about monetary law? It's very different. That's not a riot to you, Rav Chizda, that the courts could uproot biblical law. It's Hefka Besdin Hefka. It's not really uprooting biblical law. When any comes to monetary law, the courts have a right to declare people's assets ownerless. Like he says, Menayin Hefka Besdin Hefka. Where do we know that Hefka Besdin is Hefka? Like it says the pasuk in Ezra. It says, whoever's not going to come in 3 days' time, with the council of the ministers and the elders, his whole estate will be considered as forbidden. And he's going to be separated from the assembly of the diaspora. So you see that the courts could just totally take away all a person's money, and that's because if Hefka Bezin has, that's not uprooting biblical law. Rabbi Lazar brings a different source of pasuk in Yeshua. It says, Eila Nachalas, these are the inheritance, Asher Nachlu, Elazar, Kohen, Yeshua Nun, Elazar, Kohen, and Yeshua Nun bequeath, Beroshi, Avis, and the heads of the fathers, Lamatas, B'nai Yisrael, to the tribes of the Jewish people. Now the question is, what do heads have to do with the father? Meaning, he should have just written, Beroshi, Matas, B'nai Yisrael. Why mentioning Avis? Ella, rather, Lemlecha is coming to tell you to compare it to fathers. Just like fathers bequeath to the children whatever they want to, so to the leaders of the Jewish people, they bequeath to the Jewish people also whatever they want to. But al kapanim, what we see is that the courts have the rights of doing monetarily whatever they want to. So there's no riot to Rav Chizda to prove that you see lakar dav minatara. So we're still with a question essentially Rav Chizda. The question we had asked from Amid Aleph, which is going to take us also into the next daf, was that how could you say that truma? It's not truma kol iker but biblically it is truma. Where can you find the courts of Masna and Laka Dav Natayr? So Rav Chida tries to continue being arrived in the next part of the Brisa. The Brisa said a metamala. We said two things. We had three things. He yarshin tzar. So he said, no, that's not a raya, because that's hefka bez nefka. But we also said metamala. He said that you give metamata. How could you say that? Her father lets a kohen give him metamata. But what do you mean? The husband is a claim. You see, the Rabban being Eikud Dav Menatayra, and same thing's going to be for Achilas beginning with Truma, that how could you say such a thing? Biblically, he's not her, he's a Kayin. But how could he be Metama to his wife? But it's only rabbinically married. Biblically, she's not married to him. So, and the Kain's forbidden to be Metama if it's not his wife. So you see, Eikud Dav Menatayra. Says, no, Mishum David Meis Mitzvah. Which tries to discuss is how far do we say it's a Meis Mitzvah? It's a Meis Mitzvah. Meis Mitzvah, Kohen's allowed to be Metama. It's a mitzvah to bury someone who has no one to bury. It says, you have a Meis Mitzvah. His wife's a Meis Mitzvah. By the time when the Brayse says, Meis Mitzvah, who's considered a mitzvah to bury, even if you're a Kohen, is Kol Shein L'Koven. Whoever has no one, doesn't have anyone to bury them. But if let's say the person would call out and others would respond to that person, it's a Meis Mitzvah. That's not a Meis Mitzvah. So Vaseis, this woman has relatives and she's dying in town. Says the Gemara, since her relatives are not inheriting her, it's like she'll call out and no one's going to answer. Says, yeah, I'm out of the will. That's it. I'm not. Don't call me when you drop dead. Yeah. So basically, she's considered like a Meis Mitzvah. It discusses exactly doesn't know how far, but she's a Meis Mitzvah, and therefore it's not a raya. Don't prove to me from Matamala that you see Rabbanim being Oiked Matar. It's not true. She's a Meis Mitzvah. Because since she would call out, no one would come to her, so therefore he's allowed to, because no one else would partially bury her. And that's why, even though he's a Kohen, he's allowed to. The last raya, as we continue down with Tzadim and Aleph, so it says, but it says, Vashel beginning Truma. How could she eat Truma because of him? I mean, she's a Zara, she's a non-Kohenist. Only rabbinically she's his wife. So how could you see Rabban being Oiked Dav Menatayra? Says the Gemara, no, Truma, but Truma did Rabbanan. Rabbinic Truma. Rabbinic Truma, it's a rabbinic halacha of marriage. So their truma, which are rabbinic, that it can feed her, but you're right, we're not talking about biblical truma, and therefore it's not being Oiked Dav Menatayra. So we still have not yet come to a proof for Rav Chizda for the concept of that Rabbanim give Oiked Dav Menatayra to answer for him the difficulty on him, which we're really going to end up with that question. We're trying to get him out of a pickle. He's in the pickle. How could you say that the truma, when you did b'mezid tamei and tar, is you didn't do anything kol leker at all? I'll say biblically it's truma. Rav Nasma, it should make sense. He says, yeah, it's truma, but you got to do it again because we're penalizing you. But how could you say it's not truma at all? So he's trying to krichares and find the sources that you see that Rabban give Oiked Dav Menatayra. But if he doesn't, he's stuck where then it would seem to be a question on his opinion. Thank you to any time.